it gets better. So on the one hand, people are trying to travel and get their lives back to normal. On the other hand, they have all these pressures that are really reinforcing what they need to do differently. And the reality is that as we look at the impact of all these changes on society, these impacts are felt more by women than by men. So 4 in 10 women globally only have enough money to afford the basics. If we look at Asia Pacific, 82% of Asia Pacific women are consciously watching what they spend. We've done some segmentation, just looking at how people are feeling about their own personal situation, and we've classified people according to whether they're struggling or thriving or in between. You can see that there are a lot more women that are in the struggler segmentation than men, and that is for all the reasons that we know. Women generally are in the lower income jobs, they have more caregiving responsibilities, we have this gender pay gap that still exists. So the reality is that all of this change that is happening is impacting women in a bigger way than men. So we could talk about a lot of different topics here, but I thought briefly I would touch on 3 topics that I think are particularly important. One is, what does this mean in terms of spending shifts? How are men and women really thinking about where do they spend differently in the future? Secondly, what are the priorities? What are the new concerns for women? And thirdly, we'll talk briefly on workplaces, because obviously workplaces have gone through a dramatic shift. Everyone had to work from home in most industries. Some workplaces have come back full-time, but not many. So there are different workplace models now as well. So let me just offer a few quick comments and data points on each of these 3 topics. So when COVID hit, obviously everyone had to spend at home. We then started seeing things opening up, but if you ask people now, where is your future spending expectations, you can again start seeing the expectation of the spend shift back towards home. And a lot of this is economically driven. It's less about COVID nowadays, it's more about the pressures that society is feeling. So you can see some of the big negatives are still on some of the dining, some of the entertainment, even the holidays, whilst bookings are coming back, there's still concerns around, am I going to have enough cash to spend? And you can see the increased spend on groceries, utilities, on the back of fuel prices. And particularly when you look at women versus men, you can see much more of a focus on topics like education and childcare. So often women bear more of the brunt in these areas, and we can start seeing that their priorities are shifting much more in these sorts of areas. So this will put pressure on budgets. It also puts a lot of onus on the industries, I think, to recognize what can we do differently to try and ease some of these sorts of pressures. So we're starting to see a spend shift back towards home, particularly for women, around education and childcare. Now, if we ask people what their priorities are, you can see that 32% of women now have a totally different set of priorities from a couple of years ago. And that's having a big impact on the buying behavior as well. One of the big topics is wellness. So physical wellness and mental wellness. And a lot of this comes from the stress that COVID and the inflationary concerns are putting on society. You can see that women are more worried about financial and job security generally than men. And that is also manifesting itself in terms of how important wellness is. So you can see that 67% of women are placing mental wellness as a very, very high priority. Higher than men, and certainly a lot higher than we saw a couple of years ago. Similarly around stress management and saving for unforeseen circumstances. So again, I think the framework is we really need to think as a society and industry, how can we make sure we have the infrastructure, particularly for women, that can face into this wellness priority for the future. And then last but not least, we have this whole workplace, return to workplace type model. So if you look on the left, pre-COVID, 58% of women were basically 5 days a week on site at whatever workplace they had. Going forward, then the expectation is that number is 44%. Before, you had 27% of women either working at home or in a flexible type environment. Going forward, that number will go up to 38%. So on one hand, this is quite good. There's more flexibility being built into workplace models. But on the other hand, this also creates a lot of challenges for women. We ran a focus group with a number of C-suite executives in India on this topic. And again, it reaffirmed some of the topics we already know about, that there is an income disparity, there's potentially greater income loss for women, there's more unpaid work, more caregiving responsibilities, and we can see that work from home has the potential to overlook recognition and growth opportunities. So the concern is that as we build new workplace models, it's very, very important to make sure that we don't have any unconscious bias in that design. We need to think very, very carefully the accountability. We need to focus on implementation of last mile policies, particularly around mental health. And there's a real importance as well to review management styles, more of a consult and discuss type management style rather than an inform and tell. Because otherwise you will alienate people, you will alienate women, and you will make their lives a lot harder. So these are three very, very big factors that we see that that are impacting women. And of course, it means that we have to all step up as an industry, as industries, as governments. We have to ask ourselves some important questions. How can we help her by providing affordable offerings, in this world of rising prices? How do we make sure that our products and services really align with the values and priorities that she upholds? Are we enabling men to lean in? Are men leaning in and evolving to fill the gap, lighten the load? Are our values and policies transparent? How do we create a society that gives a real voice to women? These are all huge questions. I know a lot of these topics will be discussed in more detail as well over the next couple of days. But now, I would argue, more important than ever, it's really, really important to lean into these types of topics. And just to finish, and I'm sure Irene will talk more about this. There is progress in one ways, and some ways, we're not seeing as much progress as we would like. We are seeing some progress, I think, on, Fortune CEOs, more females. We're seeing, more seats held by women in national parliaments, but we're not seeing as much progress on, reducing the pay gap. We're not seeing as much participation in the global female workforce. So as we think about recovery, to really quote Antonio Gutierrez, it's really, really important that a sustainable and equal recovery is really only possible if it's a feminist recovery, one that puts progress for girls and women at its center. And I fundamentally believe that also to be the case. So thank you for spending a few minutes listening to me. And again, I really, really look forward to the next couple of days of discussions.
Thanks, Justin. And I think the one thing that we can take away from that presentation, there are many things, and I'm sure you'll have plenty of questions, but it is a feminist recovery. I love that. We will now head to Marnie Through, who is the head of Space and Satellite Solutions at Amazon Web Services, based in New Zealand. Marnie enables the space industry to achieve its most ambitious goals through the power of the cloud and focuses on leveraging transformative services such as machine learning, AI, high-performance computing, satellites and data analytics to improve every aspect of the space enterprise and mission. She works across a diverse group of local and global stakeholders in the public and private sector. And she is a great mentor for women in STEM, and I know she's got a great program she's going to share with us today.
Thanks, Lynn. Good morning, everyone. Sawadee ka. I am so honored to be here with you today. My sincere thanks to Irene, Tess, if Tess is here somewhere. I want to share a little bit about what we do in space, satellite, emerging technologies. As David mentioned earlier, digitization is entering every aspect of the economy. And space is no different. I want to ensure that there's a majority of women in the emerging space economy. So let me ask a question. How many of you think space is something far, far away in a galaxy, Star Trek, Star Wars? Maybe you think of Matt Damon or George Clooney, Sandra Bullock. I'm guessing that's kind of what, usually when I say space, people are like, oh, rockets and satellites. Actually, it's a lot more. It's a lot more tangential to what we do on Earth here. You may not realize it, but space technology is what helps GPS, so how you get around ride shares with Grab or Uber. It's what determines how we do our banking. And even things like emergency response, disaster response and recovery. I'll give you a few examples so you can see how it actually looks like in real life. Now, the reason I'm here to share what's happening in spaces with you is because Morgan & Stanley estimate that the space industry will be worth $1 trillion by 2040. And since you are here today to shape how the next generations engage, the next generation of women and young women engage in the future of space, I want to share a little bit more about this with you. So, what are some of the questions that are driving the new space economy? It's questions like these. Is there life out there? Can we find Earth 2.0? More importantly, can we preserve and maintain the Earth that we have today? How did the universe form? It is through the pursuit of these questions, through science missions advancing knowledge, that technology is actually being spurred to move forward faster. So decades of international space activity have shown the needs of bold science and exploration missions drive innovation. What does that mean? Well, the world is entering a new renaissance of the space age. As of 2022, there are 77 different government space agencies in existence around the world, 16 of which have launch capabilities. I don't want you to think this is just NASA and ESA. Across the Asian society, India, Japan, this week we had a Korean mission launch, the Nuri Space. 300 Korean space companies were involved in that launch. We had Arianespace take off satellites for ISRO in India, Malaysia for MEASAT. There's lots of activity right here in this region. In Thailand, we also have GISTA. I have colleagues who are working closely with the remote sensing satellite applications right here in Thailand, which is quite exciting for us because there's emerging space companies that are being built right here in Thailand. Ensuring that the growing space economy has more innovative products and applications that can be shared amongst us all. So it's important for me to stand up and share this with you because a lot of what is yet to come